Well, hello there, Space Monkeys. Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. And in this episode, I'd like to talk for a minute about false flags. We have to be really vigilant over the next coming days and weeks as the Russians kind of overtake Ukraine. And as it stands today on March 28th, it seems that Mariupol has completely been taken over by the Russians, and Mariupol is a city that was an Azov battalion stronghold. They basically had control of the entire city. They were using human shields there. They weren't letting people leave. But as it turns out, the reports are coming in now that in fact Russia has scattered the Azov battalion to the wind and has overtaken and liberated Mariupol. As Russia continues to take over Ukraine, it becomes likelier and likelier that these extremist groups that are getting defeated in these cities will stage an event that is so catastrophic that it creates a pretext for NATO and the United States to get involved militarily in Ukraine. So we have to be very careful. This isn't the first time that the United States has gotten involved and bombed a country on a false pretext, a false flag event. It happened in Syria recently with the alleged gassing of his own people by Assad. We know now because of the OPCW whistleblowers that in fact Assad did not gas his own people, but Trump still used that as pretext to bomb Syria, and I believe he killed like 22 people in that bombing. You know, the Gulf of Tonkin for the war in Vietnam, it's happened multiple times in our history. So Biden has recently come out and said publicly that if Putin uses chemical weapons against the Ukrainians, that would be pretext for us getting involved further. That's very scary and very irresponsible of him, if not downright sinister, because if he accidentally said it, it's just, it's stupid to do so. But if he's doing it on purpose, he's basically like hinting, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If there's anybody that wants us to get involved further, wants NATO to get involved further, you need to stage some sort of event which we can use as pretext to manufacture consent for escalation against Putin. Okay, so that's very scary. I'm going to read to you exactly what he said, but chemical weapons seems to be like the red line that the United States is drawing in the sand. And what the scary thing is here, guys, is that means that any of these extremist groups that are getting wiped out by the Russians right now, in their death throes, are they going to do some sort of catastrophic event to try to get backup from NATO? Manufacture consent so that the United States can get involved and help them out before they get completely wiped out. And we're going to read in the second half of this video a bit from Max Blumenthal's Gray Zone article that came out last week, talking about how the Azov battalion likely has already done this in Mariupol with the theater bombing that happened a couple of weeks ago that you guys may have seen. As it turns out, that looks much more like a false flag event. And the initial reports that came out that said there were hundreds of people killed in the basement there, as it turns out, nobody was killed. There are also photos surfacing of the Azov setting up, pallets and things up against the side of that theater. And then you can see later on in pictures that were taken after the theater was allegedly bombed, that exact area where they were setting up all of this equipment was exactly where the explosion happened. So there's a lot of things that seem to indicate now that might have been a failed false flag attempt. And we'll read about that in the second half here. But let's start with Yahoo News here, talk about what Biden actually said to set the stage here. Biden says that U.S. and NATO would respond if Putin uses chemical weapons in Ukraine. And this came out March 24th. President Joe Biden on Thursday said that the U.S. and NATO would respond if Russia uses chemical weapons in Ukraine, though it did not expand on what the response would look like. Quote, "We would respond if he uses it," Biden said during a news conference at NATO headquarters in Brussels after a reporter noted that the Biden administration has warned of the real threat of Russian President Vladimir Putin using chemical weapons and asked the president if this would trigger a military response from U.S. and NATO. Quote, "The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use," the president added. Biden declined to comment on whether the U.S. intelligence suggesting that Putin is deploying, moving, or considering the use of chemical weapons, but the U.S. officials have repeatedly warned that Russian forces may use chemical weapons. Now, I'm going to say it another time. If I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. U.S. intelligence is not a good source. Like, they're meddling all over the world. They'll tell you whatever they need to escalate. So just saying, well, we just happen to think that Putin is going to use chemical weapons against the Ukrainians because U.S. intelligence tells us, that's not a good source. Secondly, we have to note the timing. If Putin is doing so well, and it seems like the Russians are absolutely doing very well right now in terms of taking over the country of Ukraine, the last thing that they would want to do is get NATO and especially the US military more involved. So Biden saying this publicly, Putin looks at that and goes, well, the last thing that we're going to do now is use chemical weapons, because that would escalate further with the other juggernauts in the in NATO. So when they're doing well, there's absolutely no reason why he would do this. And also, there's no reason why, if you have a very tactical military and you're doing well denazifying and demilitarizing West Ukraine, the last thing you would do is use chemical weapons. You don't need to. You can use traditional, military, artillery, and other types of weapons without having to resort to chemical weapons. So it makes no sense for Putin to do this. What it would do, and even Cenk Uygur realized this with the Syrian gas attacks, and he's a dope. He came on and he goes, it doesn't make sense for Assad to do this right now because the United States just drew a red line saying that if Assad gassed his own people or used chemical weapons on his own people, we would immediately intervene, and that's the last thing Assad wants, so this doesn't make any sense. And he's right there. Even Cenk Uygur is smart enough to see that the timing didn't make sense. So the timing is going to be crucial here, guys. If it's suddenly there's a chemical weapons attack, the first thing you should be thinking is, did the Azov battalion or an extremist Nazi group stage it and try to pin it on Russia? Rather than, did Russia do this? Because it makes no tactical or strategic sense for Putin to gas the Ukrainians at this point. It makes no sense at all. So you have to be aware of that. Now let's look further into what happened real briefly here. Mariupol has, it seems, been liberated here. I'm going to read to you here from this is all over the internet. This is one of the ones that I saw that was reporting on the ground. SeymourRocks.is. Mariupol, the Azov battalion commander, is now in Russian hands. Russian forces managed to capture him alive and take him around the city center before taking him in for further interrogation. During his transfer, a crowd gathered to try to lynch him for the atrocities suffered by dozens of members of his order. Residents rushed furiously at him with punches and kicks as soon as they saw that he was now a prisoner. The deputy commander of the 503rd Regiment of Ukrainian Marines who tried to escape from Mariupol was also captured with him. He told Russian military and journalists who had gathered at the site that his unit no longer existed. The rest I have divided into two small groups and are trying to escape from Mariupol. That's a quote. Mariupol is permanently lost to Ukraine. There is no longer a hotbed of resistance. That is why the Russians decided to deliver humanitarian aid to the city center despite the fact that it has not been cleared 100%. Let's real quickly go down here to the bottom. Zelensky admits territorial loss and defeat in Mariupol. Russians announce referendum. And this is a quote from Zelensky. It is impossible to save Mariupol without additional tanks and aircraft. This statement belongs to President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. It was made during his last sermon to the Ukrainian people. In this way, Zelensky seals the defeat of the Ukrainian forces and the Azov order in the region. Maps of the area showing the regular situation are changed by friends and foes of Russia. Mariupol is depicted in Russian colors as Russian forces now control 70% of the city and all the government buildings. The area is considered a thing of the past for Ukraine. So I saw Jackson Hinkle reported on this as well. The Azov battalion has been scattered to the wind. I'm seeing reports that a lot of them escaped Mariupol in civilian clothing. So if you think that they're destroyed, they're not. They're just scattered and they're going to regroup. And this is where it gets scary because that was their stronghold. That was where the Azov battalion was dug in like a tick. And now that they've been scattered, that's why you have to be worried about them going to extreme lengths to get backup, particularly from NATO and the United States. So let's real quickly then talk about the potential false flag that also happened in Mariupol recently. This is from the Gray Zone. Max Blumenthal wrote this article, and we'll read just a part of it here. Was the bombing of Mariupol Theater staged by Ukrainian Azov extremists to trigger NATO intervention? This came out on March 18th. Western media have reported that Russia's military deliberately attacked Donetsk academic regional drama theater in Mariupol, Ukraine, claiming that it was filled with civilians and marked with signs reading "children" on its grounds. The supposed bombing took place just as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appealed to the U.S. Congress for a no-fly zone, fueling the chorus for direct military confrontation with Russia and apparently inspiring President Joe Biden to brand Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, as a war criminal. Another thing that definitely is not going to help anything in terms of bringing this to a peaceful conclusion. Joe Biden labeling Putin as a war criminal, that means that Putin, he thinks that he's going to get tried by the International Criminal Court as a war criminal, which then it de-incentivizes him from coming to the table and coming to a peaceful resolution at this point. So again, Joe Biden just escalating, trying to create World War III instead of back off from World War III. But I digress. A closer look reveals that local residents in Mariupol had warned 3 days before the March 16th incident that the theater would be the site of a false flag attack launched by the openly neo-Nazi Azov battalion, which controlled the building and the territory around it. Civilians that escaped the city through humanitarian corridors have testified that they were held by Azov as human shields in the area and that the Azov fighters detonated parts of the theater as they retreated. Despite claims of a massive Russian airstrike that reduced the building to ashes, all civilians appear to have escaped with their lives. Video of the attack on the theater remains unavailable at the time of this publication. Only photographs of the damaged structure can be viewed. The Russian Military of Defense has denied conducting an airstrike on the theater, asserting that the site had no military value and that no sorties were flown in the area on March 16th. And that's another thing you have to take note of. Putin's not just some dum-dum bombing things at random, trying to create terror. This is very surgical and strategic. It has no military value to bomb a civilian area like that. That doesn't make any sense, other than to, again, take big pictures of it and manufacture consent for NATO and the United States to escalate further. That's a false flag. So Azov, on the other hand, stood to benefit from a dramatic and grisly attack blamed on Russia. Exactly. In full retreat, all around Mariupol and facing the possibility of brutal treatment at the hands of a Russian military hell-bent on denazification, its fighters' only hope seemed to lie in triggering direct NATO intervention. The same sense of desperation informed Zelensky's carefully scripted address to Congress, in which he invoked Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech and played a heavily produced video depicting civilian suffering to make the case for a no-fly zone. By instigating Western public outrage over grisly Russian war crimes, Ukraine's government is clearly aiming to generate enough pressure to overcome the Biden administration's reluctance to directly confront Russia's military. But Kiev's most emotionally potent allegation so far, that Russia deliberately bombed innocent children cowering inside a theater, has been undercut by testimonies from Mariupol residents and a widely viewed telegram message explicitly foreshadowing a false flag attack on the building. The strategic southeastern port city of Mariupol has been held by the Azov battalion since 2014. Since its seizure, it has served as a political and military base for the ultra-nationalist paramilitary as it launched assaults on pro-Russian separatists in the breakaway Republic of Donetsk. Gathered from the ranks of extreme right-wing activists that provided protesters with street muscle during the 2013 and 14 Maidan coup, the Azov Battalion has been formally incorporated in the Ukrainian National Guard by the country's Interior Ministry. It was founded by the openly fascist organizer Andrei Beletsky, who has vowed to, quote, lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against Semite-led Untermenschen. Let's go down here. As Russia's military rapidly degraded Azov positions throughout the second week of March 2022, Azov soldiers apparently directed elderly civilians as well as women and children into the wardrobe hall of the Donetsk Academic Regional Drama Theater in Mariupol. A video filmed inside the dimly lit building on March 11th featured a local man claiming that 1,000 civilians were trapped inside and demanding a humanitarian corridor to allow them to escape. Only a small group of civilians could be seen in the video. However, quote, I'm begging you to stop all this. Give us the corridor for people to get out, to get the women, the kids, and the wounded, a bespectacled narrator seen below declared in this video. Since Russia launched its invasion, Azov Battalion soldiers have been filmed at preventing civilians from leaving Mariupol, even forcing men out of their cars and brutally assaulting them while they attempted to break through the paramilitary's checkpoints. If testimony from many Mariupol residents was to be believed, Azov had used many of them as human shields. On March 12th, a chilling message appeared on the Telegram channel of Dmitry Steshin, a correspondent reporting from Mariupol for the Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda. According to Steshin, local residents told him an alleged Russian bombing of the Turkish-built Kanuni Sultan Suleiman Mosque in Mariupol that day was a false flag intended to, quote, drag Turkey into the war, and warned that a false flag attack on the Mariupol Drama Theater was imminent. The telegram message reads as follows. Look at what our readers from Mariupol sent us. If the information can be verified, it needs to be highlighted for the media. Zelensky prepares 2 false flag provocations in Mariupol. One of the provocations is against the citizens of Turkey who hid in the mosque built by Akhmetov, and this provocation has already begun by the Ukrainian artillery gunners shelling the grounds of the mosque from their positions at Zinsteva Balka in Nizhnaya Lower Kirvoka. Zelensky was unable to drag the EU, USA, and UK into the war against the Russian Federation. Now Zelensky is trying to drag Turkey into the war, pinning his hopes on the explosive emotional character and the love the faithful feel for their sacred shrines. The second false flag provocation Zelensky is preparing for use by Western media. After unsuccessful provocation with the Mariupol maternity hospital, Ukrainian soldiers, together with the administration of the drama theater, gathered women, children, and the elderly from Mariupol into the drama theater building so as to, given a good opportunity, detonate the building and then scream around the world that this was done by Russian Federation Air Force and that there should be an immediate no-fly zone over Ukraine. That's the end of the message. On March 12th, Western outlets like the Associated Press repeated Ukrainian government claims that the Turkish mosque in Mariupol had been shelled by Russia with 80 civilians inside, including children. However, Turkish state media revealed that the Ukrainian government had misled Western reporters. The Kanuni Sultan Suleiman Mosque was not only fully intact, it had never been hit by Russian fire. Our mosque remained undamaged, Ismail Hakyoklu said of the Mosques Association told Turkey's Anadolu agency on March 12th. Still filled with civilians, the Mariupol Theater was next on somebody's target list. Less than 48 hours after the debunked claims of a Russian attack on the mosque in Mariupol were introduced, humanitarian corridors finally opened up around the city. The flight of thousands of civilians toward Russian military positions further weakened the Azov battalion, which was using Mariupol's residents as collateral in its bid to compel a no-fly zone. On March 16th, with his military collapsing under the Russian onslaught, the Ukrainian president and famed comedian actor Zelensky appeared by video for a carefully scripted, elaborately produced presentation before an assembly of awestruck U.S. members of Congress. I have a dream. These words are known to each of you today. I can say I have a need. I need to protect our sky, Zelensky proclaimed. The Ukrainian president thus invoked the most famous words of America's most revered anti-war activist, MLK Jr., to appeal for a no-fly zone that would bring the nuclear-armed militaries of the U.S. and Russia into direct confrontation. Just hours after Zelensky's address, news arrived directly from the Azov Battalion's press department that Russia had bombed the theater in Mariupol. Now I'm going to scroll down real quickly here for some of the evidence here. Right here. Here we go. Among the first English-language media figures to convey the Ukrainian government's narrative of the incident to a mass audience was Ilya Ponomarenko, the Kiev-based U.S.-trained reporter who has managed to rack up over 1 million Twitter followers since Russia's invasion first began. Ponomarenko happened to work for the Kiev Independent, an outlet that has functioned as one of the most potent U.S. information weapons in Ukraine. The paper had been set up with the assistance from the National Endowment for Democracy, a U.S. intelligence cutout, and an emergency grant from its EU-funded cousin, the European Endowment for Democracy. For his part, Ponomarenko has referred to the Azov Battalion as his brothers-in-arms and boasted of chilling out with its fighters near enemy lines. Seemingly swept up in the emotional maelstrom inspired by the news from Mariupol, President Joe Biden blasted his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin as a war criminal, a murderous dictator, and a pure thug. Next, Human Rights Watch issued a hastily composed press release headlined, "Mariupol Theater hit by Russian attack sheltered hundreds." The billionaire-backed NGO acknowledged it had not interviewed any Mariupol residents after the attack and provided no evidence to demonstrate Russian responsibility. Indeed, HRW's lone source fingering Russia as the culprit was the Ukrainian governor of Donetsk. And then just a little bit more of suspicious signs and holes in the Ukrainian government's narrative. Though Azov boasts a sophisticated press unit which films its exploits in the field, and soldiers are publishing even the most banal video of themselves on social media, footage of the theater bombing was nowhere to be found. Photos supplied by Azov to media in Ukraine and abroad invariably depict the bombed-out theater without any people in sight, living or dead. One day before the bombing, on March 15th, a group of military-aged men were photographed in front of the Mariupol Theater. No women were visible anywhere in the image. The men can be seen placing pallets against the side of the building, ferrying large objects across the theater grounds, and cutting down a fir tree. According to Human Rights Watch report on the theater incident, which contained no local testimony gathered after the attack, the men were, quote, cooking food on an open fire and collecting water in buckets. As seen below, pallets and other objects were piled against the same area of the building hit by an explosive charge the following day. And you should definitely look at these pictures. While the theater appeared to have been heavily damaged, quote, they bombed the building to ashes, claimed Ponomarenko, it turned out that not one person was killed by the blast. It's a miracle, the Kiev Independent reporter chirped. In a 7-minute-long March 17th package blending news and agitprop, ABC News claimed that all civilians had been saved from the theater, but that, quote, hundreds were still missing. Data on the modest-sized theater reproduced on its Ukrainian Wikipedia page puts its maximum seating capacity at 680, which raises questions about how hundreds could have fit in the basement. Further, ABC claimed the theater had been hit by Russian artillery shelling, not, quote, airdropped Russian bombs, as Ponomarenko and many others have claimed. Ukrainian media, meanwhile, has expressed confusion over the incident. The outlet 0629 has attempted to explain away the mysterious disappearance of the 1,000 civilians said to have been in the theater by claiming they were evacuated to the city of Zaporizhzhia a day before the supposed attack. Quote, we are waiting for the official verified information and do not rush to conclusions, the paper declared. As Mariupol residents poured out of the city through the Russian military's humanitarian corridors, testimonies began to emerge of ruthless Azov attacks on the fleeing civilians and of a major deception at the local theater. And this is the most incriminating stuff, is that they interviewed these actual journalistic outlets that actually do their due diligence, interviewed people that actually saw what happened. On March 17th, a young woman delivered an eye-opening account of the situation inside Mariupol to Anna, the Abkhazian network news agency. The Azov fighters were simply hiding behind us, she told a reporter. We were their human shields, that's it. They were breaking everything all around us. They were not letting us go outside. We spent 15 days in a basement with kids. They gave us no water, nothing. Describing how the Azov battalion placed its tanks in front of local bomb shelters, the woman offered a revealing detail, quote, when they were leaving, she said, referring to the Azov battalion, they destroyed the drama theater. People with shrapnel were brought to us. Numerous evacuees echoed the woman's testimony about Azov holding Mariupol civilians as hostages and said they were targeted with gunfire as they escaped through humanitarian corridors. Quote, they burned everything, an elderly woman recalled to Russian media. They bombed my whole apartment. They broke in and are sitting there making Molotov cocktails. I wanted to come in to take my things, but they told me, no, you have no business here. Asked by a reporter who attacked her and who invaded her home, the woman replied, well, the Ukrainians, of course. So it seems that there may have already been an attempted false flag at this drama theater. And if you look at the pictures, it certainly was not blown to bits, as Ponomarenko was saying. There's a big hole in the side. You know, it doesn't look like anything other than maybe there was an explosion on the outside. I'm no expert, but it doesn't look like it was shelled to smithereens. It doesn't look like a bomb was dropped from above it and destroyed the whole thing. It looks more like something exploded near the wall and then it kind of collapsed on itself in one area. But you decide for yourself, and so far they have yet to show any videos of it hitting, and I don't think they found any bodies. And that was their original allegation, was that Russia bombed it, it had a whole bunch of children inside, and there were hundreds of them. So Seems a little suspicious to me. So my point here, guys, is read the whole article, understand what a false flag kind of looks like, and ask questions. I'm not saying that there might not be use of chemical weapons along the way depending on how this war goes, but you should never immediately jump to conclusions that would lead us to World War III, especially if they're mighty fucking convenient for the Ukrainians to lure NATO and the United States into this conflict because of an event that Putin would never in a million years do, because he knows that that's the outcome of that event. So even Cenk Uygur was smart enough to question the timing of the gassing of his own people that Assad allegedly did, which now we know he did not. Do the same thing here. Question the timing of everything. We know that the United States has stated publicly that if Putin uses chemical weapons, we're getting escalated. We're getting more involved. So that signals to anybody who really needs NATO to get involved further, i.e. the scattered Azov battalion or neo-Nazi paramilitaries that are getting their ass whooped right now, to pull off some sort of disgusting, horrible event, film it, and then circulate it through Western propagandized media to manufacture consent for NATO to get further involved. We can't allow that. We can't allow that. World War III and nuclear holocaust are staring us in the face right now, so we have to be ultra vigilant. We have to protect our journalists who are doing good work in the area and report on this as objectively as we can, because the last thing we need is another Gulf of Tonkin or, Doma gas attack incident that the entire Western media picks up and runs with horrible images of something that was essentially staged by Nazi paramilitaries to get us further involved. We can't allow that. We can't allow that. So read the rest of this article here by Max Blumenthal. It's kind of long. We read about half of it here, and I will link to all of this below. And it's a very scary time to be alive, but here's the good news. It seems as though the Nazis are losing the battle. The Azov battalion has been scattered to the wind from their stronghold in Mariupol. So that's progress in my mind. And I'm hoping that, at some point Zelensky is finally allowed, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, to be diplomatic and surrender and not become part of NATO and make some concessions to the Russians so that we can all avoid nuclear holocaust. But I don't know if that's going to happen, because as of right now, he's still asking for a no-fly zone, which means he's like, come save us, NATO, and let's put everybody on Earth at risk of nuclear holocaust to defend Ukraine's right to be part of NATO. That's essentially what you're asking. Now, I don't think that's something worth going through nuclear annihilation to defend. I don't know about you guys. So anyway, thanks for sticking around. It's kind of a long episode. I've got another really good roast coming up here, guys. I'm going to do 15 or 20 jokes that'll likely get me slapped in the face. So I'm going to be putting that on Rockfin more than likely, because it can't go on YouTube. And then I've got 2 other stories planned for tomorrow and the next day. So very busy week for me. Keep fighting that good fight. I'll talk to you guys later.